Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 24 of IGEL Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got my two co-hosts with me, Chris Feeney and Seb. Chris just joined us. Chris, you're waiting on some tree guys to show up and clear cut your backyard, it sounds like.
No, not clear cutting, just trimming. We've got some big trees, like 100-footers, and some of those limbs are precarious. And so I've been talking to my neighbor. Some of them are hanging over his property, and I'm like, we got hurricane season. Let's just, let's fix this. So just waiting for those guys to show up so I can have a little bit more peace of mind.
So as usual with me, there's a couple of stories in that. Number one, my adopted dad worked for a tree, the largest tree service company in the world, probably. And I spent my summers trimming trees and hauling brush and getting poison ivy and poison oak and crawling around with snakes and covered in ticks. And I like to give the tree business credit for where I'm at today, because I'd be damned if I was going to do that every day.
Yeah, it's impressive to watch these guys climb the trees, bring them down, that type of thing. And when the kids were younger, we had some work done here at the house, and those guys were like unbelievable. So they were in awe.
It's definitely a skill, without a doubt. And you're doing that with a big chainsaw strapped to you and running half the time. And
that's right. They'll cut your leg off, right?
or worse, you reach out and cut the rope that's holding you in the tree, and next thing you know, you're laying on the ground. The other part of that I would want to bring up and kind of tie it to the end user compute world that we're in is it's constant pruning. You can't just trim some trees and be done. They're going to grow again, and they grow hair on them, philosophically speaking. And it's the same thing in EUC. I met with a client yesterday who they gave up on virtual desktops a year ago or so. And truth is, they just didn't implement it right, and they didn't keep it maintained right. It's not a set it and forget it type of world we live in. However, that's a big part of the IGEL story, is making it maintainable so that you have what you need to be able to keep it up and going, get it going, and provide that user experience that people are looking for. Seb, how's it going?
Just a perfect handover to the topic of today, right? If we speak about cleanup, trimming, and make some house cleaning work, I mean, that fits perfectly. I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking. I mean, here in Germany, it's getting warmer. We are feeling the summer, not as you are guys in the US, I guess, but it's becoming more warmer. And I got my first shot of vaccine, which is absolutely unbelievable. I couldn't imagine I could get one until the end of the year, but yes, it's done. So I'm just waiting for my second one.
All right, so that brings up a couple of conversations. It's the middle of July, on the backside, heading down the month of July, and you guys are now experiencing your full-on summer. How long does that last?
That's a really good question. I mean, I can just speak for Central Europe, so for France and Germany, but now we are coming to the situation where most of the people got their first shot of vaccine, and now we have to gather people if they want to get it and to motivate people to get it. So I was just apparently one of the last one who might have it or get it automatically. Mm-hmm. But now it's getting more complicated. So I just knew from my mother, which is spending some weeks now in France, that it's getting tough to get people motivated to get the vaccine. So let's see how it will work in autumn and winter. We're expecting some kind of, in Europe, fourth wave of COVID, but let's see. It's getting tougher at the moment.
Well, I would think in the long run, like here in the US, we're doing marketing and things like that to try to get people encouraged to go get vaccines. And I think the virus itself will be the motivator in the long run. Just like historically, I don't know, 30 years ago or whatever, that vaccine would have been maybe not well adopted early, but as time goes on and people experience the scenarios, they'll come around. And I don't think
I was watching. Sorry, go for it.
I don't think as a government or people we can force them to do it. They're just going to have to come to their own conclusions.
We should just stop broadcasting some movie plots like The Walking Dead or Fear the Walking Dead during that kind of situation, because that doesn't give a really good taste to people who might think that vaccine can give you some power to get some fresh human meat instead of something else.
Well, I guess part of that, and this may show a little bit of my political side, but if we just let the media run wild and take one death and turn it into 100 deaths over here, that'll help too.
Right.
So I think we just lost Chris for a second. Chris, you still there?
No, he wrote in the chat, so apparently.
Yeah, the tree guys may be here. He'll be right back. So keep
no
keep talking.
No worries.
Yeah,
No
sure.
worries.
I'll pop in.
at
I'll
all.
be right back.
No worries at all. So Seb, your topic for today, our topic for the day that you so graciously helped us come up with and decide to cover is
Definitely. So keep going. I'm gonna go check with him and keep talking about this topic. I'll chime back in when I get back at.
Cool.
So Seb, this is all about knowing where the relevant files are in the IGEL world and keeping it clean and up to date. Just like any other system, it can get cluttered if you let it. So the actual title, it's a blog, a video blog really, from June of this year. And it's called IGEL UMS Universal Management Suite System. What's the S stand for? I screw it up all the time.
Universal Management Suite in that case.
Suite. Okay. File system deep dive. So IGEL UMS file system deep dive, where to find relevant files. And I think there's an element of how to also keep this thing nice and tidy so that you're not leaving around junk along the way. So help us understand why you decided to cover this topic.
One main reason is what the community is giving as a feedback. I mean, most of the Tech Tip Tuesday videos we are speaking about, and also today in our podcast, is coming from the feedback that we are getting from the community. And even if the management suite itself is pretty straightforward and cannot really create an error somewhere when it comes to files, it's sometimes quite difficult to keep an overview, because coming to the general topic, you already might know that our management system is mostly built on a Tomcat. So we have a web service there, which is called a Web Directory Access or WebDev, where all the files that we exchange with the endpoint can be downloaded or in specific case uploaded. So think about certificates that you want to deploy to your endpoint, certificate authorities for your Citrix connection, like an example, or some more basic stuff like a specific wallpaper, a boot splash, or even the universal firmware updates that you want to deploy to your endpoints need to be stored somewhere. And in a general approach, they are stored in a specific web folder, which is then delivered to the endpoint, and the endpoints can download something from there. What should be downloaded from there and in which context is stored by profiles, firmware customizations, and a couple of other processes that we have in the Universal Management Suite. Mm-hmm. And in that point of view, we cannot create some deadlocks or some conflicts, because everything is stored on the file system and on the database. But sometimes I would keep the example of a custom partition like an example. So for those of you who might not know what a custom partition is basically a portable version of an application that you can deploy to IGEL OS if it's not already part of our operating system. Simple example, Teams as a local client, not the optimization, really the full client on the endpoint can be deployed by using the custom partition feature.
So, Seb, would it be good to stop here and explain the concept of the IGEL OS and the different layers, the different partition layers? Hopefully I'm saying that right, clean it up or not. The different layers that make up the IGEL operating system, and a custom partition is a layer that you create and push out through the UMS. Is that right?
That's exactly right. The operating system itself is covering a lot of feature by default. So if you get the IGEL OS on a UD Pocket, on an IGEL device, or you are converting a foreign hardware to an IGEL OS device, you are already having installed per default 3 Citrix Workspace app versions, a web browser, at least one for Firefox or Chromium, VMware Horizon, etc., etc. So everything's installed by default. But we have still some components that we're not allowed to distribute, like a Cisco AnyConnect VPN client, or the Teams client, or the Zoom client, or just for the simple reason that you are not really covering all the needs of the markets by deploying every kind of software in our operating system. We focus on being an Edge OS operating system for terminal services and BDI solutions. So we are delivering the clients for the terminals of access, but not really for the local usage. And that's mostly because of legal stuff, security, but also of size, because we are already targeting about 2.8 gigabytes. And if we put the Teams client, the Zoom client inside of it, it will grow extremely fast. So that's where we are using the custom partition feature.
So real quick on that. So you guys, you have a base operating system that's Linux based. It's layers. It's read-only layers. That makes it secure, lower attack vector, secure, smaller to deploy, easier to deploy. In other words, now all we have to do is deploy whatever layer needs to be updated, not the whole layer over again. That's huge. But then when it comes to needing some of those extra applications to work in your environment, you guys have them. You just don't deploy them by defaults, or people can create their own custom layers and push those down as well.
Exactly.
Quick question for you on the custom layers. Are they
Sure.
read-only as well, or is there a flag you set that makes them read-only or not read-only? How does that work?
On the custom partition level, it's really the mounting of a specific partition. So you create basically first a specific area of your IGEL OS with starting at 1 megabyte up to a couple of gigabytes of a store. It's just a read and writable place of the operating system. So it's basically like you would create a partition on Windows by creating partition E with 1 terabyte. The magic happens after that. So as soon as you download the file, which is a tar.bz2 file, for those of you, it's more kind of a tar or zip file, which is downloaded, extracted locally into that partition, and then linked with a symbolic link into the operating system. So if Teams starts like an example, Teams is expecting specific libraries, is expecting specific binaries in the operating system, which we don't have. So what we do is we are looking for every dependency that this binary, like the Teams binary, is needing. We are copying it from a development system into this file, and we are extracting it locally and linking it to the operating system on every boot. So to answer your question shortly, the custom partition itself is mostly read and writable and is, let's say, out of scope of that security feature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. You said something just now that made it kind of light bulb go off for me. It's like the old days. I'll call it the old days. 10 years ago, when you would come up behind a systems administrator, either on a server or on a desktop, and you would see them creating a new partition on their operating system, like an E partition, and that's where they would install their apps and put all their data. That used to be a way to keep from overrunning the operating system partition and freezing your machine, locking your machine up. It also used to be a way maybe you could port it later, but that's a very good analogy to what you guys are doing here. You're just doing that systematically from the UMS and then pushing it down, and all of a sudden, boop, it's there, and the executables and the DLLs and things needed are. Can I say exactly. DLLs in a Linux world? Does that apply?
No, we call libraries, but it's more or less the same procedure, even if it's not the same format.
Right. Okay.
And that's coming to the reason why I put that together. We have custom partitions in different versions. So let's assume, just taking one example, Cisco AnyConnect in version 4.7.
Yeah, before you go there, I do have a question for you. Maybe you can't answer this question. There was some conversation recently that you guys were also going to deploy even a base image of IGEL, where maybe there's a checkbox during the install that said, don't install anything but X, or maybe put these layers on. Did I dream that? Is that something you can comment on, or is that, I don't know, tell me where to go from that statement.
I can comment that, definitely. I would not go too deep, but we are expecting some, let's say, major changes in the next months, maybe next year, on our operating system. So what we have at the moment is what I told, we have a lot of features installed by default. And most of them are not needed by the end user. So we are definitely having an eye on having a base system and just install what you need. In which context and in which granularity is something I cannot share for the moment, but I can just give you an insight. It's pretty amazing. I already have seen some slides, and I hope that it will blow your mind like it was for me. We're just using IGEL now for a couple of more or less a decade. It's, for me, the biggest change you might expect in the Agile history.
Yeah. Hey, I've got another real quick one for you, and this comes out of a conversation with a customer yesterday. The magnitude of the file system and the ability to push down custom partitions, it's relevant in all IGEL operating systems as long as you have enough hard drive space on that endpoint, except for the RX 420. And the reason why I want you to kind of comment on that to make sure I'm saying it right, as well as I've got customers out there that are grabbing an RX 420, which is your Raspberry Pi, which maybe I'm not allowed to say it that way, but Raspberry Pi version, your ARM version of IGEL. And then they're trying to throw a bunch of custom partitions down on it. And they're finding that, hey, I don't have enough space or I can't do it. So just a quick comment on that, right? The RX 420, the ARM-based version of IGEL, it's a little off topic here, but it is limited in some of this magic that we're talking about here today.
Definitely. Even if I would maybe just cut that statement in a different order. The space is one approach, but that's something you could solve theoretically. The major issue that you might have there is never forget that the custom partitions are created for an x86 base operating system. And on ARM, we are speaking about an ARM platform, which means an absolutely different binary library dependency level. So a custom partition created for, let's say, our main customer base for IGEL OS 11 on x86 will never work on an ARM device. So you would have to recreate it. But at the moment, I must admit that the interest from the field for custom partitions on ARM are, I would call it, limited at the moment, because everyone is knowing that the RX 420 is a great device, great housing, a great hardware solution, great cooling, etc. But the main focus of Raspberry Pi endpoint is not to have a local magical work like you have on IGEL OS on x86. It's really having a small, cheap, easy to replace device that you can more or less mount everywhere. And that's my major difference. So to cover your question, yes, the space is one limitation, but the main limitation is the processor architecture.
Right. Yeah, without a doubt. The RX 420, which we did a podcast on a few months ago, but
yeah,
where it fits, it's going to be great. But in most cases, it's not going to fit. It's just that very unique use case where you need a specific device that's low cost and low loss, right? If you lose it, no big deal. It fits where it fits. Okay. All right. So sorry to derail you on those two topics, but I know our customers are asking us about it and they're running into it. So I thought I would bring that one up.
Perfect. And that's basically the custom partition is just one approach we covered, but let's imagine that this file that you want to deploy to your endpoint needs to be downloaded from somewhere. And I know that even on myself, I got a new custom partition from dev, so I'm creating a new one. I'm putting it in that specific web folder. I will come back a little bit later on where to find it. And then you have, 10 versions of a specific custom partition, and cleaning that up, if you didn't do that from the beginning on, is pretty complicated. So that's the reason why I'm explaining how to debug also the process of downloading the files to the endpoint, because there are so much pitfalls in that process that is quite complicated for someone who never touched IGEL OS or the IGEL UMS before. So that's what we covered in the tutorial.
Well, I gotta admit, that's one of my biggest challenges when I get into that custom partition world and I try to go down this path. I don't really understand the Linux operating system file system the way I should, or maybe the way I did back when I was studying to be a Unix admin. And for normal Windows admins, they're probably just kind of lost. I get on with people and try to get them to do a couple basic shell type commands, and people have no idea. So for a lot of your, let's say, Citrix or Windows administrators that are getting in the IGEL world, it's really important to learn about the way to navigate, how to navigate a Linux file system, and how to use things like VI editor. That one will drive you nuts if you don't know how to use it.
Honestly, I couldn't live with that VI. I already had the discussion with a couple of people. There is a couple of other, let's say, more graphical user interface driven editors for Linux, Vim, GVim, etc. But I must say that I learned with VI, and I'm still sticking on VI. There's Nano, and there is so much different editors out there. But I'm sticking on VI. understood one time how to use it. But I must admit, the first time I lost, I don't know how many hairs on my head because I was just entering some, for me, standard components, like entering a word, and it just ended up in deleting the whole file. And I was not knowing what I'm doing. I'm with you. It's a hard time, but after that, you are really liking it. At least for me, for myself, it was the case.
As long as you don't have too much of a gap between when you learned it and used it, and then you use it again, because you're like, I know how to do this, but why can't I? The escape right quit or whatever. That's just something's that simple. Anyway, so let's flow the way you want to flow. Sure. I do have the bullets here where you break out, which I love that you do this. When you have the video, like we're trying to talk about here in another audio video session, you break out the different sections of the video here, and I've got a highlight on the screen. But when you're ready, let's jump into the bullets and what you cover in the video. But only when you're ready. If there's other topics or other things you want to kind of stage here before we jump into that, please do.
No, it's perfect. We already covered more or less the first bullet point, which is the introduction, just explaining that we have different files in our operating system and in the IGEL UMS that you might want to deploy or to get back into the UMS. So that's more or less the introduction.
Let me pause you on that because I'm still confused. Sure. And I've played with this a decent amount. There's the file system on the IGEL endpoint. And then there's the file system on UMS where we're using WebDAV, right? WebDAV, is that what we're using?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We were using WebDAV, which you actually defined a minute ago as to what that stands for. What does that stand for?
It's Web Directory Access. And on the V, to be honest, you got me.
No worries.
Hold on.
So Web Directory Access, that's fine. That's good enough. And what that is, that's the built-in section of UMS that's available to the clients to pull stuff from, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's installed by default. We have a couple of minutes left, so just giving some historical background on that. For those of you who might remember IGEL as also a Windows operating system provider on Windows NT embedded or XP embedded and all that stuff. And on older UMS versions, you had a tool which is still existent, and I will cover that in a couple of seconds, which is the UMS Administrator. And there you had the ability to create your own WebDAV services to deliver your Windows snapshot, like an example. Mm-hmm. That's something that is completely lost in actual versions of UMS. So you cannot create your own WebDAV components because you just have one, which is UMS file transfer, but you are still allowed to create profiles to download files from other FTP, HTTP, Samba, whatever server, that's still non-touch, but you cannot create your own WebDAV components inside of the IGEL UMS anymore. So just in case, even if it might not apply to most of our customers, just wanted to share that one.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's going to be one of my next topics. Help me understand how that WebDAV basically share, how you would handle that in the case of a world where you're coming through the IGEL Cloud Gateway proxy. Is that available through the IGEL Gateway proxy or only on the local area network? Help me first of all understand that.
You just put your finger in an extremely big round and put some salt in it. So the general answer is yes, it's available. And just in case, I just want to correct myself, it's web distributed authoring and versioning. So my mistake. It's absolutely a different acronym. Coming back to ICG, yes, you can still download small files from that folder over ICG. But the way we are acting between the endpoint, ICG, and the UMS doesn't allow you to download bigger files. And that's my pain point. If I come back to my pain on that remark, you cannot deploy a universal firmware update through ICG from the UMS. You can send out a comment, yes, and you can give the endpoint the ability to download it from a public FTP or web server, yes, but it will not get downloaded from the UMS file transfer. So for small files, background pictures, wallpapers in that case, boot splashes, certificates, yes, no question. If the files are getting bigger, like I don't know, 10, 20, 30 megabytes, like a custom partition, it might come to an error, and on universal firmware update, it will get to an error for sure.
So let's say 10. We'll use 10 megabytes as our threshold for the moment. And I'm not holding you accountable for that. But So is there something in the ICG, and maybe we don't want to go this deep, is there something that in the ICG that flags that, or is it just not capable of handling that much file transfer back and forth?
Last one. It's related to the way how we are dealing with our reverse proxy service. And that kind of protocol, even if it's secured, is not meant to be used for bigger file transfers. It's more or less by design for the moment. We might expect a change, I don't know, in a couple of years, but for the moment, it's still something we are working on it, but not with the highest priority, since we have the other topics that we mentioned at the beginning.
Well, and before we throw darts at IGEL for this, let's talk about the fact that to do this right anyway, you should use a distributed file system across the country or whatever, some type of Amazon web share or something. I know Chris has helped us a ton with that. I'll let him jump in on here. But Chris, forget about the fact that the ICG can't handle bigger files. How should people make external files available so that we can push custom partitions and firmware and things if they're doing it right anyway?
Yeah, it's a great point, right? So if you look at our architecture, right, I'll just real caveat, right? Technically, what I've done in my lab is I allow 8443 into my UMS server, and it's not going through ICG, and I'm able to pull down anything and everything. Now, what Seb's talking about is if you're not obviously not opening up that WebDAV port. So our best practice is definitely when you're designing this, put it out there. Whatever repository works well. Maybe it's a AWS S3 bucket or something, right? Something that's distributed FTP, something that you can maintain and control, and then use that when you're pushing down anything, right? Particularly the larger objects like the firmware updates and stuff. And so that is the best practice there. And then obviously it limits your exposure for anything hosted directly on the UMS itself. So.
So Chris, let's
we're engineers. Yeah, we're engineers. So you're going to have people who say like, well, it can be done. It can be done.
Yeah.
Of course,
Chris,
it can be done, but that's not what we recommend.
So 8443 kind of going around the ICG over to your WebDAV, that's doable. That may create security concerns. Maybe you put your whole UMS system out in a DMZ somewhere where it's pretty benign as far as you're concerned. But yeah, so I mean, there's several ways to get it done. One way, as a quick pitch for XenTegra, we can host the whole thing for you, and this all becomes a moot point for you.
Right.
But getting those files, bigger ones, out there some other way than off the UMS is something that should be thought about.
So one of my colleagues, he leveraged AWS and S3 bucket, right? Which and then the other cool thing is the fact that it was able to replicate those files, in this case the firmware, across different zones in the world. And so if you were coming in and hitting that URL or whatever from Germany, for example, it would direct you to download from something in Germany, probably, or whatever, Europe, a little bit more closely. So that is a powerful thing. So anyways,
so guys,
keep going.
Well, I don't think we meant to, but I think we just covered bullet number 2, which is exchange via WebDAV externally and internally and externally. I think, right? We got that covered, Seb?
Yes and no, because in the tutorial I'm covering, at least on that case, on Windows, but it would also apply to UMS installed on Linux with some small changes on the path, is where to find that files, because browsing to that folder is one approach, but you might have some files that you want to double check locally because of the size. You want to delete them, and accessing them via a web browser will allow you to download them, but not to make changes to them. So coming back to the folder structure, assuming that you didn't change the general install part of your UMS server, right, or the data service, which is since a couple of versions now available during the first install process, that you can install, that was already available in the past, but installing the UMS server on another partition or another folder that C or C program files. You have now the ability also to move the data directory to another partition or to another folder. And that's a separate step in doing the first installation. If you didn't change that, and that's what we are covering today, I'm assuming that it's somewhere on C under program files, then under IGEL remote manager, then under RM GUI server, you don't have to keep that path in mind. It's already written down in the tutorial, but you have a UMS underscore file transfer folder. And that folder is the component that we are speaking about. It's more or less a central piece of file exchange mechanisms that we have in our UMS and IGEL OS ecosystem. So assuming that you want to deploy in a standard way, a firmware update, a custom partition, a firmware customization, so wallpaper, a certificate, whatever you have made inside of the IGEL OS, of the IGEL UMS, would be found there to 99%.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I wanted to point out. I know that my own UMS, and I can speak, I guess, for a lot of people in the pre-sales, event services, etc. We are putting so much files into that folder that sometimes even downloading firmware updates and deleting some, keeping them in the recycle bin of the IGEL UMS server, because we have a recycle bin also in the IGEL UMS console. This directory can increase extremely fastly, and you can have a lot of gigabytes, sometimes more than 10 or 20, especially if you use the UMA or the Windows operating system with IGEL OS. This folder can increase extremely fast. So that's the first approach. If someone is asking me, I cannot work with the UMS anymore because I get some weird errors. Honestly, it's always a good idea to check if the partition where the UMS server is installed is not getting full, because that can happen quite easily.
Yeah.
I don't know, Chris, how your point of view is, but that's something that I have seen a couple of times already. And the service is still there, but you cannot work anymore with the IGEL UMS like you did before. So that's one thing I want to explain, that the UMS file transfer isn't something which is maintained by the UMS itself. It's just giving you some advices if the disk is getting full, but you have to have an eye on that folder.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to have a sense of how the operating system and the file system with it interact. It's not going to just tell you, hey, I'm getting full, you need to do something about it. It'll just start getting wonky. Is wonky technical enough?
Yep.
It's today's world, sure.
All right. Hey, we're gonna run out of time. Let's go through. Seb, you touched on something just now, really important. Using a browser, I think, is where you're going with this, to test access, to make sure that on host name, fully qualified to name X, fully qualified name X, on port Y, you can get to directory Z. Basically just the path. To make sure that all the routing and things are there, to make sure that that web delivery over HTTP, HTTPS. What's the default going to be?
The default is, if someone is asking, I cannot get something deployed to my endpoint. Besides all the port checks that you have to deliver, one easy step to achieve is going to the endpoint, start a web browser session, Firefox or Chromium, and enter HTTPS // and then the IP address. Please use the IP address first of your UMS server. Yeah. Then / and the port we are using for the secure file transfer, which is 8443, which is our own port, and then the SSL port 443, and then /UMS underscore file transfer. As soon as you hit
real quick on that. On that. So they can do that through a browser, knowing that if they use an IP address, or knowing that if, like we're going to talk about in a minute, the certificates are all whacked up, they're going to get that prompt that says, hey, do you trust this cert? And they can say yes as a browser, just knowing that as they do it, as the system tries to do it later, it's not going to be able to have that that malleability, and it's going to have to work, right? It can't get any errors. So, I know this sounds trivial, but I do work with people that go through, hit it with a browser. They just accept all the pop-ups. Hey, I don't trust this. I don't trust that. And then they still don't understand why it systematically won't work. Any error at all means it's not going to work.
But in that case, the self-signed certificate that we are delivering inside of the IGEL UMS might pop up a certificate error on the endpoint. But that's fine, because we trust our own certificate that we create inside of the IGEL UMS. So that's definitely something that will show up. But just right after that, you will get a login prompt. And if you get the login prompt, you're already sure that, let's say to 99%, that your communication is good. But if you get that, you have, assuming you didn't change something, you can log in with your main UMS administrator that you might already use for your UMS console into that web browser session. And then you should see more or less a direct access to all the files that you have seen in your file system under the UMS_file transfer. And you should be able to click on it and to download it. I mean, downloading a custom partition is not the way you should do that via a web browser, but at least trying to do that is giving you a first advice. Hey, is there something maybe on the proxy side, on the antivirus side, on the IGEL UMS server side, which is blocking my communication? If that one is working, then you're already pretty sure that it's another question. But the main thing that I would check is your IP address reachable? Can you log in with your main administrator? And can you start a download process? If that one is going, you can go to another step on the debug side, but that's already more than enough.
Right. Yeah. Huge to make sure the basic processing order is there, and then you start. Now, do you guys normally recommend, I guess you probably do, that you use FQDN for accessing this in the long run? That way you well, I guess you said it trusts its own cert, so IP probably does work.
It does. We recommend, even if it's not mandatory, to have the IGEL RM server propagated via DNS or DHCP, which is the standard server name that we are expecting during the automatic registration process. So that's a hard-coded value that we have in our operating system that is needed, not mandatory, but the endpoint, by booting up, it would check if a server is available on the network, which is called IGEL RM server, which is not the case usually. That's the reason why we are putting a DNS alias that we are using there for the UMS registration. Yeah. And that's something that you could then check.
Let me say that again, just for clarity. It's the IGEL IGEL RM server is the host name that you guys really don't require, but recommend people put into their DNS, because that is what that's what an IGEL system comes up looking for. And I know that's kind of slightly off topic, but it does come up every once in a while. So maybe.
Perfect.
Yeah. If you want to do the zero-touch deployment, read the manual and make sure you create this DNS records or DHCP option tags. So when IGEL boats up for the first time, it knows where to go and talk to its first UMS server. Yeah. So
guys, we got about 15 minutes left. What's this section on the IGEL UMS administrator piece covering, Seb?
On the UMS administration part, what we have there is we have a separate application, which is not shown up on every installation by default, which is a tool that we used in the past to make the administrative settings of our IGEL UMS. It was related, and it's still related, to the port configuration, etc. In that case, we're not covering that one from the functionality itself, but more where to find it, because sometimes it's not in the start menu, or you don't have propagated maybe via your service provider. So in the same directory, the remote manager RM GUI server went before. We just go one step backward to remote manager and go to RM admin. And that RM admin, you have an rmadmin.exe, which is the executable for the main administrator. And this administrative tool is meant for making the UMS configuration. It's not meant for the default directory rules. It's not meant to be for the ICG configuration. It's really the server configuration itself. So that's where you configure your database, where you configure your network port communication. So let's say everything which is underneath your UMS console. In that case, just wanted to share with you one thing. You have the embedded database, which is extremely important if you don't use an external one, obviously. You might already have moved your embedded one to an MS SQL or Oracle server. But if that isn't the case, we have a couple of optimizations that you can do inside of that tool. And if you go to database, to your data source, you have there the ability to check your database structure by deactivating and activating the database connection, and to make a database optimization, which will more or less recreate every index of your embedded database. That can be helpful if you have some weird SQL errors popping up in the UMS console. It doesn't happen that much anymore, but it was a case, I don't know, 1 or 2 years before. Or if you're experiencing some slowdowns in the UMS console usage.
Okay. The next section talks about the UMS certificate, which we've kind of covered a little bit, how important that is, and the fact that you guys trust your own. What in the section of the video there, what are you covering about the UMS certificate?
Let me just cover one last sentence on the embedded database, because that's something that I'm showing in the tutorial, if I remember right. The database is stored obviously in the local file system. So still thinking of the remote manager folder where your installation is made, you should have, if I remember right, a subfolder which is called DB, like database. And under that one, an RMDB, which is meant for remote manager database folder. That's where your database is stored if you use the embedded one. Please don't delete anything inside of that folder. It's just meant to explain you where to find it. And that's the reason why you have a folder with a big file amount, a big file size amount in that subdirectory. That's really meant to never touch any kind of files there, just to be sure that have an eye on it if you are thinking that something is popping up on the file size. On the certificate, right?
Hey, Seb, before you go there, though, I think the three of us should probably plan to do a podcast, a review, a blog, if you have it, on the do's and don'ts of making your UMS redundant, and there's a lot of conversations there around what to back up and how to scale it, and who should. I mean, there's a lot of people that go that route that really didn't have a need to go that route to begin with. But okay, let's go back to the UMS certificate and talk about what you're covering there.
Great, Eddie. Coming to the certificate in the key store we are creating during the first UMS installation process is your one-on-one key between your one UMS server or multiple UMS servers if you are using HA and your endpoint. If you lose that certificate and you will reinstall your UMS server somewhere else, you will not be able to manage the endpoints who were registered to your old UMS anymore. So you have to reset every device to factory defaults on site. You cannot do that via remote anymore.
And guess
so that's
what?
the reason why
Chris and us, XenTegra, just had a customer we had to do this with this week. That's interesting time.
Really?
Not for this reason, but we have to have them reset about 20 devices and point it to a new UMS environment.
Yeah. One little note of that too is the reason for that is, if we had allowed the ability to just fire up another UMS server and just take a device randomly, that's like a rogue scenario, right? It's a very bad security scenario. You don't want that. And so just keep in mind, right, if you're doing a migration, I think that the nice piece of that, working with that client last week, was that just backing up and restoring the database itself was actually not a bad thing. So there's several ways to kind of get around this potentially, but by default, if you tag into one UMS server register, another one's not just going to be able to go out and grab it and pull you over. That type of thing.
Yeah.
So Seb, back to your topic here. You're talking about the certificates and the keys and how those kind of go together, and they need to live in harmony, and don't take one without the other. If you do, you're going to have a broken system.
That's basically what I'm covering in the file system, right? So we have a specific folder there, which is called RMTC server. I guess TC still stands for Thin Client, which is a kind of old name that we use for our own product. But that's definitely exactly the key store that we are creating, and we are changing with the endpoint on a certificate base. So basically, that's not something that you should think of, because if you do a regular backup inside of your UMS administration part as a UMS admin task, what we already covered in another podcast with you, is you shouldn't think about making some specific backups of that. But it's still something that I'm doing. I'm just copying all the files from that folder to SAN or NAS, just to have them on the file system base, just to be sure that I'm clean on that one. But that's just my upshot. Just wanted to show you, if you want to check the server certificate or the TC key store, where to find it, and it's a subfolder RMTC server.
So we got about 5 minutes left, and to be honest, I've got about 5 minutes of battery left on my laptop. I didn't bring my charger down here to the lobby of the hotel. Then you have two more topics: the log folder, which at some point everybody's going to need to know where that's at, and then temp folders. Can you walk us through those?
I will do so. I will make as fast as possible. So still on the remote manager, you have your RM GUI server. That's where we already found the UMS_file transfer folder, or RepDev component. We have a folder which is called logs. I mean, that's pretty obvious. It's where we store our log files, especially the Tomcat files. So you might notice that this folder is increasing a lot because we have a lot of files and communication that we want to log. And we have a rotating tool, which is usually deleting and packing all the different files into a zip file and deleting them after a couple of months, years. But just in case, that's also a folder that will have an eye on it. And just take a look if you might do some cleanup just by your own, because maybe some rotate jobs didn't went successful. So that's a folder where you can add your log files, but you could also clean up a little bit if you're thinking that you're losing a little bit of your disk space. Basically, you will find everything inside of that folder which is related to our IGEL UMS. Just be aware that sometimes it's better to read the files in a log viewer than in a notepad. Mm-hmm. Then, last but not least, the temp folder. That's a folder that you should definitely use with caution. I just wanted to show you that there is a temp folder. You are not supposed to delete something inside of it, but I had already the situation. I will try to cover that in a minute. You downloaded a universal firmware update via the UMS. And this download went corrupted for which reason or whatever, network hiccup or whatever. You deleted that corrupted file from the universal firmware update. You emptied the recycle bin, but you still cannot re-download that version anymore into your UMS. It might be a good idea to have a look into the FW- something, I guess, web or HTTP folder, just to check if there is some, let's say, corrupted part of a file sitting over there, and deleting them if they fit in the firmware version that you try to download. But basically, that folder should be kept away from your mindset. But if you have something where you think, okay, that's not going the right way, you can definitely have a look into it and maybe sort for the bigger files into it. Sorry, and check if there is some file zombie files sitting over there.
You know, this all brings up a good question. What is the minimum requirement for the file system that you put UMS on? And then what's reality? What do you guys recommend? Look, we used to live in a world where you had to account for every bit and every byte. Now it's pretty much you throw more at it than it could ever possibly use. However, I'm sure at some point even that becomes a dumb statement. What do you guys recommend for your UMS server?
Chris, so you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say the first thing I would say is point to what we have documented. Certainly with our the growth of IGEL, there's been a search for best practice architectures, things like that. Sizing guidelines, and we have a really good article. If you're going to start with a small server that will handle the local database, or go with one that will ultimately transition to one with an external database. So we have that guidelines, as far as disk space size, that type of thing. Due to time, I will not reiterate what those are, but just say go to kb.igel.com, and you can just find a UMS sizing guidelines. You'll hit it right away, find the article.
Okay. Seb, any general comment on that?
No, it's definitely the way to go. I mean, from my personal view, I would start with something like 6 to 10 gigabytes. It just common sense. If you still have that space left, please use that, because you will download so much different private builds, universal firmware up to your UMS server, and you will definitely not have an eye on it every 2 weeks to make some cleanup jobs. So let's say 10 gigabytes is a value I'm feeling good with, even if you're using UMS for a couple of years. 10 gigabytes should be more than enough.
And by today's standards, that's drop in the bucket. However, you never know what somebody's scenario is and how much what they're dealing with, trying to save space for whatever reasons. Well, guys, I appreciate you doing this. As always, I love getting on the IGEL community podcast that we do and talking tech, and not some of the other more marketing, but yet viable and valuable stuff that we cover on the other one. Not to diminish that at all. Seb, I always appreciate you showing up ready. I mean, looks like you're doing this stuff all day, every day, and hearing from you is extremely valuable for the folks who need this type of information. I've got 3 customers I'm going to share this recording with the minute we get off here.
Cool. Thank you very much. I mean, I truly appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
And you and I were talking before we hit the record button about the IGEL community, and hopefully by the fall or winter, you guys are going to start doing some in-person events. Anything we can do to help get the word out and get those organized and help support those, I'm all for it.
I would definitely come back to you on that one. Definitely.
Chris, you get your tree guys out climbing around in the backyard?
They're here. We walked around and kind of showed them. I haven't heard the chainsaws fire up, but I'm waiting for it to happen like right away. So
how about the wood chipper? Are they going to chip the wood up?
I think it's coming up later. It's not here yet. So
I spent my summers, I think I may have mentioned earlier, doing tree work, and I was in charge of the wood chipper. Man, I still have nightmares about that thing.
Scary. It's an impressive piece of equipment, that's for sure. But
I had that thing grab a limb, and the limb grabbed my I had ripped t-shirts right off of me. It was, in hindsight, that thing, I'm scared to death of that thing.
Yeah, you do not want to be let's just say you don't want to be caught with that thing and learn.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, man. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Appreciate you joining.
Thank you very much.
We'll do it again in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Bye.
For sure. Bye-bye.